Welcome to Chapter 4. Here's where we're going to look at applying the skills and beyond. So this little chapter here is actually two chapters from the long version and from the book smooshed together into one. So again, we're going to cover some things to be aware of. We're not going to do as deep of a dive here. Make some notes about things you want to learn more about or keep learning by looking at the book itself or going on to the long format from here. So in this section here, we're going to look at some of the really important skills around consent that really provide us with the ability to do it right in the moment. And the first two ideas around this are around boundaries and rejection. So when we're looking at the idea of consent with a partner, a lot of the time we're going to be looking at having to set boundaries with someone, saying no, or here's what I'm okay with, here's what I'm not okay with. And or we might have to be looking at how we're going to deal with rejection, which is we put ourselves out there a little bit and make a suggestion or ask someone something, and they say, hey, no, I'm not interested, or that's really not something for me. And our ability to do those two skills, set boundaries and deal with rejection, is really going to be something that paves the way for us to be successful and healthy in how we're doing consent with partners and for ourselves. So we'll look first at the idea of boundaries. So setting boundaries, again, you have a handout here on boundaries and rejection for these two sections here we're about to talk about. So just making some notes as we go. So how we set boundaries is different ways to say no. So the first way around setting boundaries is recognizing that if someone's being safe and respectful with you in asking for consent, they're being polite, they're not pushing, they're not coercing, it can be hard to put yourself out there. So it really can be best if we respond in kind, that we're safe and respectful in return, that we're being kind of kind and gentle in how we're saying no or setting that boundary as a preliminary step. And then if that, for some reason, the person's not listening or they don't listen the first time, that we'll get firmer from there. So if we set a boundary and we say, hey, actually, I'm not interested in doing that today, or maybe ever, whatever it is, then, oftentimes we can offer something sort of recognizing the person did put themselves out there, and that can be hard. So we could say something like, hey, listen, thanks so much for asking. I really appreciate that you were brave enough to ask. I know that can be hard, but, unfortunately, I don't sort of see you that way, or, I'm not actually interested in that with you. So just sort of something a little bit softer, kinder can be a nice place to start. Now, that being said, this isn't mandatory. If at any point you just feel like you need to say where you're at, you always can. If for any reason you feel unsafe, remember, you don't have to be polite whenever your safety is coming into question. So then we look at sort of part two is what to do if you do need to be more firm. So if someone has asked you and didn't listen to your first response, so they say, you want to go to the other room with me, you want to go whatever, and you say, hey, I'm not interested, and they say, oh, come on, like it'll be fun, don't worry, like let's go. And now it's the person hasn't listened, so we have to be more firm. So you can repeat yourself. You can, make any type of excuse, whether it's real or not, that you'd like to. Ask to go to say, hey, you know what? Actually, I need to go to the washroom. Anything to create space from you and that person if they haven't listened or been respectful the first time. So that would be setting boundaries. Do this in your head. Try to practice saying it out loud. A lot of times, if the first time we ever practice boundaries is in real life with a person, it can feel a lot different than we might expect. So it actually helps to practice a little bit in front of the mirror. Definitely do this out loud. If you have someone safe that you can role play this with, that would be really great too, a friend or family member. Now, dealing with rejection, this can bring up a lot of stuff in us. Remembering that if we sometimes feel threatened, we might drop into that second floor of the house we talked about in the last video, where it can set us into fight or flight, where we're like, oh no, this isn't good. I don't feel safe socially, emotionally. I just want to be liked. I want to be loved. That's true for all of us. So we have to be ready to deal with our own possible reactions if we end up in that space of someone not wanting to be with us in a way maybe we hoped. That's our responsibility to deal with. We have to be responsible in coping and dealing with feelings around rejection. So remembering that rejection isn't a bad thing. I know there's a lot of talk out there around, friend zoned and, things that make it seem like it's bad. In fact, rejection is good and it's healthy. We want our partners to be honest with us. That's how we know we're doing consent properly and we're being legal, is important, right? As well as respectful, safe, and healthy individuals. So if it happens that we say, hey, do you want to, I'm really interested in you, do you mind if I kiss you? Like, are you into that? And the person says, hey, listen, actually, I don't really see you that way. We can always respond with something like, you know what, thank you so much for telling me and being honest and truthful with me. I really respect and admire you. So the last thing I'd ever want would be for you to feel uncomfortable. So thank you so much for being honest. Why don't we go and just like hang out, watch a movie instead? Or, something that you were doing before that did feel comfortable with this person. So again, dealing with rejection, setting rejection too, right? If someone has a bad reaction to you setting a boundary and they start to look hurt or sad, or they start to make you feel responsible for their emotions, know that you don't have to deal with the other person's emotions around rejection. Same as we're responsible for our reaction with rejection, other people are responsible for theirs as well, okay? So that's boundaries and rejection. Now, two other things we're going to quickly touch on here are around growing with consent. So this is the idea of understanding both healthy and unhealthy relationships, as well as what consent looks like as we get into longer term or more sort of ongoing relationships, interactions with folks. So the first thing to understand is around healthy relationships, unhealthy relationships. The way that we are with people, with our partners, and that they are in turn with us can impact how safe we feel. Remembering that, that house, so that if you're safe with a person, that you feel like you can be honest with them and truthful with them, and honest with yourself and how you're really feeling. If relationships start to become unhealthy, so if there's any sort of excessive jealousy, any controlling behaviors, any physical behaviors that are unsafe, pushing, shoving, slapping, hitting, right? Anything that's really not okay in a relationship. These types of behaviors can make it so that we also don't feel safe to give our true consent. And we may not realize this is happening right away. A lot of times relationships start out really healthy, but then as people kind of slip into old patterns or old sort of stuff gets in there that's not healthy, things can shift. So we have to be ready and willing at any time in a relationship, no matter how long it's been, a few weeks, a few months, a few years, that if things start to get unhealthy, and again, there's a lot more information on what unhealthy relationships look like in the book and in the long course video, that we're willing and able to step back and say, actually, you know what, this isn't a safe place for me anymore. I don't feel like I am safe to say what I really want around consent. So two things we look at in the book and the long course, a little more depth, is what are aspects that contribute to trust in a relationship, and what are aspects that are healthy conflict resolution, ways that we talk to each other and our partners that can sort of underpin how safe we feel around getting and giving that true consent. So now as we are looking again at longer relationships, when we've been dating for maybe a few months or a few years, we can often have a bit of growth with consent with a partner. So all of the steps we've looked at around, capacity consent, hot spice, legal, physical, emotional, and social aspects of consent that we've talked about so far, these are really, really, really important at any time, but especially with new partners or people we haven't done things with before, because we don't know their language yet. We don't know what are their sort of touchy subjects that aren't comfortable for them, how ready they are for certain things. We have to really get to know people, and we have to do and put in the proper legwork to make sure we have that. Now, when we've gotten to know people a lot better, we've, been on a bunch of dates, we've talked a lot, we've, opened up emotionally. At certain points, we start to be able to read each other's cues better. We can start to rely more on nonverbal body language consent because we know what that looks like. We made a bit of a comment earlier in one of the other videos about how much of a look is enough of a look for making out versus oral sex versus sexual intercourse. You don't know that in a stranger or someone that you're just starting to be intimate with. But a partner you've been with for many years, for instance, you might actually know what that looks like. and you can actually grow with consent together. Now, if that ever starts to become unclear, you're not sure, always going back to checking for verbal consent, checking for all those stages at every moment, and remembering that they always still apply. So just because you've been intimate with someone before doesn't mean that that has to or is going to continue as a given. You still have to check in each time with a partner. It just might be a little bit easier or faster because you know that person's rhythms, you know what they look like when they're into it and when they're not, because you have a lot of experience being intimate together already. So we can grow with consent as we get older, as we get more experienced, and with specific partners. Anytime we're back to sort of square one with a new partner or something new sexually intimate with a partner, even if we've been together for a long time, we're making sure we go right back, taking all the time to do each of those steps, making sure all the communication is there. We're checking in, we're making sure everyone's on the same page. Now, another aspect that's really important to think about in terms of safety and what's sort of okay, what's sort of not okay, is around the idea of when alcohol and drugs get put into the mix. So we know with capacity to consent, if there's sort of a level of intoxication where someone's not present, like they're slurring their words, they're stumbling, or they're plain old passed out, no go. Doesn't matter. Even if you've had sex with that person before, even if you're in a long-term relationship, even if you're married, that's not okay. That's still not legal consent. Now there's a whole bunch of gray, obviously, before usually people get to that state. So how can we stay safe? First thing we have to know and understand is any amount of alcohol or drugs does increase our risk and put us at risk and our partners potentially at risk. Now for this, we'd like to talk about something called harm reduction. There can be safe risks we may take with partners and people we know better. And there's things that each level that goes up, each new drink, each new drug that's introduced, risk has gone up, and it's maybe an unsafe choice to make. So we want to think of, okay, how do we stay safer? So the standard things to think about are one, for alcohol anyway, one standard drink per hour. So that's one bottle of beer, one small glass of wine, one sort of shot of a liquor. And the same with drinking and driving. If you wouldn't be legal to drive a vehicle, you're not legally probably going to be able to be giving consent for any sort of type of sexual intimacy. Reducing or removing alcohol and drugs is more important with new partners and partners we haven't done a certain thing with before. Sober is better and safer for those things. Anything that's not a sober decision with new partners or new things is a riskier choice. If you're not sure how sober someone is, like you meet them partway through a night or a party or something where you know drugs and alcohol have been around, on the safe side, harm reduction would be choosing to wait, get that person's contact information, express mutual interest, flirt, do whatever, but waiting to be physically intimate at a time when you're both in a better frame of mind and you know how sober that person is for sure. Remembering everyone can look a little bit different. What we might assume looks really drunk in one person is very different in another. And until we know a person really well, we don't want to take that risk. We don't want to take that chance. We want to make safe choices for them and for us. As risk goes up, each new drink, each new drug that might be introduced, we're slowing down and we're being even more and more cautious. If at any point we're unsure, we're abstaining and we're choosing not to move forward because it is a big deal and it can be very serious for both them and for us if we make the wrong call. And last but not least, remembering we're not always the greatest judges of body language or enthusiastic consent when we ourselves are intoxicated. So if we're looking for consent in a partner and we think we have it, but we are under the influence of something, we might be misreading the signals as well. So understanding our own levels of intoxication and how that can affect how accurate we are in looking for consent in a partner. This is a very long and involved topic. We're not going to be able to get into every nuance of it, but I want you to have a very good understanding up front because it is something that does come up a lot in cases where something didn't go well, someone's hurt, someone's had a really bad experience. Oftentimes drugs and alcohol have been involved. So I want you to think about this ahead of time, knowing how to make as safe choices for yourself and your partner as you can. Last but not least, we won't cover in depth here, but I do want to just quickly mention the idea of contraceptives. If you don't already know what your options are around barrier methods, hormonal methods, vaccines, proactive kind of approaches, and things like morning after pill, make sure you're doing your research. Again, it is in the book. It's in the long course format. They should teach you, hopefully, this in school at some time as well. Know what your options are. Know it's your right to get to choose what you're going to use. If your partner, for some reason, has a different idea about what they want to use and it's not in alignment with you, this might not be the right partner for you, or you might need to wait until a later time when you both understand better how to have the safest sex for you both as possible. So protecting against both STIs and pregnancy, know your rights, know your options, and know that is part of consent is deciding how you're going to do that together with a partner. So from here, there's one more handout I want you to have a look at, take a read through. It talks about your sexual rights, things you're entitled to, things around you're entitled to be able to converse about these things with a partner. You're entitled to someone who's respectful, kind, and considerate of you and your wishes and your feelings, your choices. Things like you have the right to set your own boundaries, to develop and explore your own sexuality, to have your own questions, and to be in control of what happens to you, who, what, when, where, and how. You have the right to sexual pleasure. All genders have the right to sexual pleasure. You have the right to be asked for consent and to say no at any time if anything ever feels uncomfortable. So highly encourage you to print this off, have a read through, even put it up somewhere in your room or take a picture of it on your phone, somewhere where you can kind of look back and reference it if you need to kind of be reminded of some of that empowering stuff. That in some of those tough moments where you're not sure if you're doing the right thing or you're doing it right, go back to that and remember what your rights are. Okay. So from here, we're going to go to chapter 5. Chapter 5 is a quick overview of what to do when things go wrong. So what is sexual assault? What does it or can it sometimes look like? What do we do? How can we maybe take some proactive approaches? And how do we maybe also help keep others safe if we're at, a party or a social function and we see something that isn't safe or that we know isn't okay? So good job finishing up your chapter 4, and we'll meet up again next over in chapter 5.